If you've ever picked a fight just to see if they'd still choose you afterward, this is why. Maybe it started over something small. They left the dishes again, they took too long to text back, they forgot to ask how your day went. And somewhere in the middle of pointing it out, your voice got sharper than the moment deserved. You weren't really mad about the dishes. You weren't really mad about the text. Some part of you was testing something else entirely, whether they'd stay uncomfortable with you, whether they'd stick around, even when you weren't easy to love in that moment.
And if that's ever been you, I want you to know something before we go any further. You're not broken, you're not manipulative, you're not too much. You're a person who learned, somewhere along the way, that love needed to be proven before it could be trusted. And testing it, even in painful, backwards ways, felt safer than just believing it was real. Think about how many relationships in your life have quietly run on this pattern. You start an argument that didn't need to happen. You go a little cold for no clear reason. You bring up an old wound at the worst possible time. And underneath all of it, there's a question you're too afraid to ask directly. Do you actually want me? Or are you just here because leaving hasn't crossed your mind yet? So instead of asking, you create a situation that forces an answer. If they stay through the storm, that's your proof. If they leave, well, at least you found out now instead of later, when it would have hurt even more.
This is what psychologists call a form of protest behavior, and it usually traces back to something called attachment anxiety. When you grew up in an environment where love felt inconsistent, where affection showed up sometimes and disappeared other times, where you couldn't quite predict when someone would be warm and when they'd pull away, your nervous system adapted. It learned that love wasn't something you could simply rest in. It was something you had to monitor, manage, and sometimes provoke just to keep tabs on where you stood. So picture a kid who only got their parents' full attention when something went wrong. Maybe calm, easy days passed by unnoticed. But the moment there was a meltdown, suddenly there was eye contact. There was concern. There was presence. Without meaning to, that child's brain quietly absorbed a lesson. Conflict gets me seen. Calm gets me ignored. And that lesson doesn't stay in childhood. It grows up. It follows you into adult relationships, into friendships, sometimes even into work relationships, whispering the same old logic. If you want to know they care, make it hard for them to prove otherwise.
Here's where it gets even more human. This isn't really about wanting conflict. It's about wanting certainty. Uncertainty is one of the most unbearable feelings for an anxious nervous system because uncertainty feels like danger. Your brain doesn't like sitting in, I don't know if they truly love me. It would almost rather have a painful answer than an unclear one. So testing becomes a shortcut. Instead of tolerating the discomfort of not knowing, you create a crisis that forces clarity. A fight gives you data. Silence doesn't. Think about the friend who cancels plans just to see if you'll ask what's wrong. Think about the partner who brings up a mistake from 3 years ago in the middle of an unrelated disagreement. Think about the person who goes quiet on purpose, not because they have nothing to say, but because they're waiting to see if you'll notice, if you'll chase, if you'll care enough to close the distance yourself. None of these are really about the surface issue. They're about an old, tender question underneath. Am I safe here? Will you stay even when I'm difficult?
And here's the deeper layer most people miss, even about themselves. This behavior isn't coming from a place of wanting to hurt the other person. It's coming from a place of wanting to protect yourself. If you can control when the conflict happens, you feel like you have some power over the outcome. It feels less devastating to be abandoned after a fight you started than to be abandoned out of nowhere for reasons you never saw coming. In a strange way, testing the relationship feels like taking back control in a situation that otherwise feels terrifyingly unpredictable. You'd rather cause the storm than be caught off guard by one.
But here's what most people misunderstand about this pattern, including the people doing it. They think they're checking if the other person loves them. What they're actually doing is checking whether they themselves are lovable, even at their worst. Because somewhere inside, there's a quiet, painful belief that says, if they only love the easy version of me, then it isn't really me they love. It's the performance. So the test isn't just, will you stay? It's, will you stay even now? Even like this? Even when I'm not making it easy? That's a much heavier question to carry into a relationship, and it's usually not a fair one to place on someone who has no idea they're even being tested.
And this is the part that stings a little, but it needs to be said gently. These tests rarely give you the answer you're hoping for. Even if the person stays, the anxious mind doesn't fully believe it. It thinks maybe they just felt guilty, or maybe next time they won't. So the relief is temporary. And eventually, the urge to test resurfaces again. The tragic part is that people who love you can pass 100 tests and still not be able to convince the part of you that never got proof as a child. Because the proof you're really looking for was supposed to come from somewhere else, a long time ago. And no adult relationship can fully make up for that missing piece. It can only support you while you learn to hold it yourself.
So what actually helps here isn't forcing yourself to stop caring. And it isn't blaming yourself for a pattern you didn't consciously choose. What helps is starting to notice the moment right before the test happens. That small window where you feel the urge rising, the itch to say something sharp, to go quiet, to create distance just to see if they'll close it. That's the moment worth pausing in. Not to suppress the feeling, but to get curious about it. What are you actually afraid of right now? What would it mean if you asked for reassurance directly, instead of manufacturing a crisis to get it?
It feels far more exposed to say, "I'm scared you're pulling away," than to pick a fight about something else entirely. But that exposed honesty is usually what actually builds the safety you're looking for, instead of just simulating it for a few hours. It also helps to remember that a person passing your test today doesn't erase the wound that made you need the test in the first place. Healing isn't about finding someone who proves themselves enough times that the fear finally disappears. It's about slowly teaching your own nervous system that you can survive uncertainty without needing to control it. That you can sit in the discomfort of, "I don't know for sure," without turning it into a crisis. That is often the real work. Not fixing the relationship, but rebuilding your relationship with your own fear of not being enough.
So if you've ever pushed someone away just to see if they'd come back, or gone cold just to see if they'd notice, understand what was really happening underneath it. You weren't trying to ruin something good. You were trying to protect yourself from a pain you'd felt before and never wanted to feel again. That impulse makes sense. It came from somewhere real. But you don't have to keep proving your worth through conflict. You're allowed to ask for reassurance in plain, simple words. You're allowed to say what you're afraid of instead of acting it out. And slowly, the more you choose honesty over testing, the less you'll need someone to pass a storm just to believe they're still standing beside you.